This is Must Farm in the fenlands of Cambridgeshire. An extraordinary site that is revolutionising what we know about our past. This landscape was once part of the largest wetland in Britain, and deep down it is the waterlogged conditions that have guaranteed the survival of a prehistoric farmstead for 3,000 years. It is an exceptional sight, and I just can't wait to see it. During the Bronze Age, this settlement collapsed into the marshy fens, where it was frozen in time, perfectly preserved, until it was discovered by chance, and this major excavation was launched.
This is the crown jewels in terms of what it will tell us about past humanities and about the way people lived in this landscape 3,000 years ago.
The level of preservation is so extraordinary, this site has been dubbed Britain's Pompeii. For the first time, we can step inside our Bronze Age ancestors' homes and discover uneaten meals, pristine farming tools, beautiful glass jewellery, and the biggest collection of Bronze Age fabric ever found in Britain. Evidence of the first complete textile making process. This excavation is posing new, intriguing questions. How were the houses built? How did the people survive here? And was their world peaceful or violent? The answers may unlock the mystery of how our ancestors lived. Over 10 months, the archaeologists are working to unearth evidence which they hope will help them to solve this puzzle. But this excavation promises to shed light not only on this ancient settlement, but also on the very roots of our modern world. Deep in the marshes of the Cambridgeshire Fens, Must Farm is wedged between the M11 and the edge of a quarry. The village was built in the Bronze Age, about 1,000 years before the Romans invaded Britain.
Oh, wow. Oh, this has just sent the shiver down my spine. This is amazing. I cannot tell you how unusual this is. Most prehistoric sites, you're looking at the sediment, the soil, and you've got to try and imagine what was there. And it's so rare to get wood preserved. Look at this. It's all there, in situ, intact. 3,000 years old. I'm blown away by this, I really am. It's just astonishing.
The surviving settlement is made up of 5 wooden roundhouses, built closely together.
I want to get down in there and have a look.
There is so much domestic detail here, we'll be able to piece together how ancient Britons arranged their homes. From cooking to storage to crafts. We can see quite clearly the layout of the settlement from up here. You can make out the posts that delineate these roundhouses, and you can see how the roof timbers, the radiating roof timbers, have fallen down almost in situ.
The Pompeii analogy, it's as if we've got a pristine settlement, a pristine image of exactly what was going on within a settlement 3,000 years ago, of a series of households, all of their worldly goods, in 3D. There's another house behind there, but we've only got a fragment of it.
For site director Mark Knight, this is an unprecedented opportunity to understand the intimate lives of our Bronze Age ancestors.
It's unbelievable, isn't it? It's beyond any sort of dream of what you could do within archaeology.
While wood expert Mike Bamforth has a once-in-a-lifetime chance to investigate the structure of a Bronze Age village.
For a wood specialist, this is about the best site you could ever imagine to find. Wood survives in any environment where microbes and bacteria can't go to work on it. So in frozen environments, in very arid environments, and in wet environments where eventually all the oxygen's been taken out of the system.
Excavation is a painstaking task that can't be rushed. Every find and piece of wood is carefully cleaned of soil as the layers are slowly stripped away. Exposed to the air for the first time in 3,000 years, the timber will begin to dry out and decay, so it must be kept wet. The team is discovering near-perfect bowls containing half-eaten food, giving the impression that the villagers were interrupted in the middle of a meal. At the heart of this discovery lies a mystery, because this village was wiped out by a sudden, catastrophic event. The settlement burned to the ground, and for some reason, the inhabitants never returned.
It took them by surprise, it wasn't planned. There's a real sense here that things were all in situ, that the settlement was going about its daily routine. Hence there's food inside the pots and things and spoons and stuff like that, so it's caught that.
It's as though whoever lived at Muss Farm fled from that place, leaving all their belongings behind, and those objects were then preserved almost in situ for 3 millennia, until the archaeologists arrived in the 21st century.
At every turn, the archaeologists are making groundbreaking discoveries.
So you can see, yeah, it's got this kind of ridge running through the top of it. It's quite, you know, as you can see, it's quite substantial. The actual piece of wood itself, it's running all the way underneath, so who knows how far it goes that way or that way. And it goes over, it seems to be going that way as well. This bit's quite weird as well. This, I mean, it's probably a post, like, yeah, like this one, but the fact it's kind of, looks like it's kind of connected to this big piece makes it seem as if it's something different. I don't know.
As the object is uncovered, it becomes clear that it is something different. A find that demonstrates the people living here had access to the most sophisticated technology. This is the earliest complete wheel ever found in Britain.
I mean, this is the best preserved, most complete one from this area. That's all I need to say, really. I mean, it's just bigger and better than anything else, and complete. It's the fact it's complete is wonderful.
It's so important, wood expert Maisie Taylor has come to examine it before it's fully excavated.
It's unbelievably compressed, so it would have been quite a lot thicker than this originally.
Evidence for the use of wheels in Britain at this time is scarce. This incredible discovery suggests the team can look forward to unearthing a wealth of new evidence. The Must Farm excavation promises to answer one of the big questions about the Bronze Age. Exactly how connected was Britain to the rest of Europe?
Moss Farm sat in a wetland environment crisscrossed by waterways that to our ancestors 3,000 years ago formed a vital network for communication and trade. Water was simply the easiest way to get around in this environment, the easiest way to transport materials and to reach out and trade with other communities. It was water that connected this ancient village to the rest of the world.
In an earlier test dig, Mark Knight made another extraordinary discovery in an ancient riverbed right next to the site. 8 complete, pristine logboats.
Wherever you go along this channel, there are boats. And that is if ever there was a testament to the richness, but also the scale of human activity along this channel, then that's it for me, I think.
The unprecedented scale of this find is conclusive evidence that the villagers were not living isolated lives.
What would happen to us if, in this modern world, we didn't have the internet? How connected would we be? And you feel in a way that the logboat and the rivers was that sort of network, really, that sort of connection.
We know there was some trade between Britain and Europe at this time. Hopefully Moss Farm can help us understand how much trading went on and how far Britain's connections stretched. As the team dig deeper into the villagers' homes, they notice the fire damage to the wood occurs in a strange pattern.
Carl, this has to be one of my favourite pieces of wood. You've actually got the structure still intact here with this piece of wood with the sockets in it and these joints coming through, these pieces coming through from the other side. Lovely mortise and tenon joints.
They're beautiful. This is what I would call differential charring. So you've got some moderate charring, some cracking there of the wood, and some places where there's no charring whatsoever. There's no sign of any fire damage whatsoever. This is just changing.
Carl is puzzled as to why timbers higher up in the house are damaged, but those lower down are not.
What's that over there?
This is a wooden bowl, so it's almost entirely charred, but it's right next to another base plate like this, I think, that's only just touched. So I think what you're looking at there is a difference of height within the structure. So the bowl has been higher up when it's been sat in life in the structure. The base plate is sat at floor level, like a skirting board, and most of the heat within a fire is going to rise through the structure. So the bowl has suffered for longer because of that convection heat, whereas the base plate has been quite protected.
So do you have any idea at the moment, and this is a difficult question because I know there's so much more data to come out of this site, but do you have an idea at the moment where this fire might have started?
No.
As the fire investigation continues, the team realise that the roundhouses were constructed in an unusual way.
If we look at some of the bigger uprights, so this upright here, there's no signs of any charring on it. It's directly next to large timber members that have charring. So that level of protection suggests that that's below floor level, that our floor is somewhere up here, and all of that, the damage of the fire is then falling down to this level later on.
This same feature repeats across the village.
So we're just sitting here on the edge of Roundhouse 1, and as we're peeling the roof timbers away, we're starting to feel that we've got hints of a raised floor structure. We know the raised floor structure was here because we've got these long lengths of support posts that haven't been burnt at all.
This is an incredible discovery. It turns out that the houses were built on stilts over the water, and that's why the posts below were protected from the fire. No Bronze Age village built in this style has ever been found in Britain.
We can imagine the floor might be up here, and that dam would actually be underwater. Okay, so what Dan's excavating is the collapsed, charred remnants of a building that was above water, that's now below water. So that's why what you see is not particularly in order, it's quite chaotic, but in that chaos there's lots of indications or attributes of what was going on up here. So we're seeing timbers that are worked and are charred, but we're also seeing these sort of thatchy clumps and matted-like materials and things, as if we've got the flooring as well as the thatch above the roof as well. So it's trying to disassemble that.
While a settlement like this is new for Britain, you can see something very similar in mainland Europe. 700 miles away, on the shores of Lake Constance in Germany, a prehistoric lake village has been painstakingly reconstructed. Could this surprising connection be the clue that sheds new light on prehistoric European immigration to Britain? We know that in the Bronze Age, rivers and lakes were thoroughfares, transporting people and goods. That's why many villages around the Alps were built over water. Now, there are striking similarities between the lake villages on the continent and the newly discovered pile dwellings at Must Farm. So is it possible that the knowledge of this way of construction and indeed this way of life came to England from mainland Europe? There's already evidence that a few individuals came from the continent to live in Britain, but we don't know the extent of this immigration. This important new evidence suggests that 3,000 years ago, an entire community may have migrated from mainland Europe to the Fens.
So we could imagine the pile dwellers of Switzerland or the Alpine region, or the people that lived on the rivers of Holland, being the very people that came and occupied this space, because it was a space that they were very already adept at adapting to or inhabiting. So they already had the technology. They didn't invent it because of the change in the environment. This was their texture.
As the team digs, more intriguing evidence of powerful European connections keep turning up. Tiny, beautifully made glass beads. Well, this is something really special, Mark, isn't it? These are gorgeous glass beads from the Bronze Age.
We use the word exceptional a lot, I suppose, in the project and things, but these things stand out completely, don't they? In their delicate nature, but also in their colour.
They are such beautiful objects, aren't they? Lovely colour. That's just fantastic, isn't it? Did you have people saying to you, are you sure this is Bronze Age?
Yes.
Is this not later, is it?
Yes.
Is it Iron Age?
When we first started recovering so many beads from this context, there were sort of raised eyebrows about the fact that we were saying this was a late Bronze Age settlement, because beads aren't found in this quantity.
Mark has sent the beads for analysis to try to pinpoint where they come from.
The indications were straight away that they were exotic. They went from round here, and we were given sort of indications that they were Central European and things like that. And I think that information is being more refined now, and we're now starting to get indications that it's even further afield, sort of thing. So, sort of Mediterranean and those sorts of areas.
Finds like this are clear evidence that the villagers imported luxury goods from Europe. But the archaeologists would like to know how much they traded and from how far away. This is the River Po in northern Italy, and close to the ancient course of this river, archaeologists found a vast prehistoric trading centre, an emporium dating to the Bronze Age. Raw materials were imported from across the known world and worked up into finished objects for export. It was production and commerce on an industrial scale. The site is known as Fratercina. Professor Mark Pearce from the University of Nottingham has come to interpret some of the incredible finds for me. Mark, this is such a wonderful collection of objects from Fratercina. What do they tell us in terms of the connections of this place?
Oh, amazing. This is a connection that goes from the far end, the eastern end of the Mediterranean, right up into Central Europe. This is a centre of the world in the Bronze Age. It's exciting.
So should we start with these then? What are these little beads?
Wow, now it's a good way to start. Now, these are beads that are made out of ostrich egg. Do you want to grab them? Just be, got them there.
I'll be very careful.
Now, ostrich egg comes to Fratesina up the Adriatic as a raw material, and it's transformed here into beads.
So it hasn't arrived as a finished object?
No, this isn't a place which is bringing in finished objects. This is a place that's bringing in raw materials and transforming them.
And it is the Bronze Age we're talking about, so there is evidence of metalworking here.
Yes, here's a mould for making rings, and you can see how the copper flows down the groove.
So there would have been another half to this
Yeah,
mould,
there'd be another
and
half.
you pour the copper in the top there.
So, and then you break off each ring, and you can see where it's been broken off. It's not been finished, this one.
Yeah, amazing.
A vast range of raw materials was shipped to Fratesina. Amber from the Baltic, ivory from as far away as Asia. It's clear that the must farm villagers weren't alone in their love of exquisite things.
Now, I think we've come to the most spectacular thing last.
Yes, well, these eye beads and barrel beads are made here in Fratesina. Fratesina is the major centre of glassmaking that we know, the biggest centre of glassmaking that we know in this period.
They are beautiful beads. They're really wonderful.
So it's not just glass working, it's also glass making here at Fratesina. And here you can see some ingots of glass in various colours. This one's really interesting because you can see the shape of the ingot, and you can see where the pincers sank into the semi-molten glass as the glass worker picked it up. That's absolutely amazing. You've got the actual operations of the glassmaker preserved in this ingot.
Oh, it's fantastic, isn't it? It's preserved a moment in time, that has.
Yeah, absolutely.
Experts are developing scientific techniques that may soon be able to map exactly how Fratesina glass and those beads found at Must Farm travelled around Europe.
More recently, there's been an awful lot of really interesting work on using isotopes and other methods to actually try to understand where the raw materials for that glass came from. And that's really at its beginnings.
Sites like Fratesina are fascinating in their own right. It's amazing to think of people 3,000 years ago manufacturing all those goods and trading across the known world. The fact that we've got amber from the Baltic or the North Sea coming here, ivory from Africa or Asia. But I'm really intrigued by the glass beads. Might it be possible to find a signature for a Fratesina bead so that if one turns up in another archaeological site, we'll be able to tell exactly where it came from? We're starting to map these connections across the ancient world in a way that's never been possible before.
The Must Farm villagers possessed not only locally made goods, but exotic luxury items. But this was a world before money. So what could they have been exchanging in return?
We found this bladed object, which we think is a sickle. It's interesting because you can sort of see it's shiny still, which is really the unique thing about this site, that stuff's so well preserved that it comes out the ground shiny, which is pretty amazing.
This is number 6 in the number of sickles that have come out of the site so far, and it's the second from Roundhouse 1.
Thank you. It's a little hand sickle, still fairly sharp.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And this looks interesting down here, Mark.
Yes, well again, so there we go, we've got a socketed axe.
Yeah.
It's one of several that's come out of this roundhouse.
Ooh. Oh wow.
You can see, and it, again, like everything else, it sort of comes out looking like bronze and not green and things, so it's got that real sense of being pristine.
Heavy, yeah.
And I think that
lovely.
Maybe that's another aspect, isn't it? Another attribute of this excavation is that how fresh everything looks.
Yeah.
You know, that's the fourth of that type to come out of this house. So that's 4 from one structure.
Metal started to be used in Britain during the Bronze Age, so tools that had once been flint could now be reimagined in this exciting new material. The incredible quantity of the metal tools found at Must Farm shows that the villagers farmed on a grand scale.
The discovery of bronze was a technological revolution. It would transform life in so many ways. People had been farming since the beginning of the Neolithic, but the advent of bronze meant better tools, changes in farming practice, and an intensification of agriculture. Britain never looked back.
The team has also discovered an abundance of animal bones alongside the tools for farming and bowls of cereal. The villagers were herding livestock as well as cultivating crops. In this fertile environment, they may well have produced more than enough, and Mark Knight believes that this agricultural surplus could have been used for trade. We know that the Bronze Age was marked by a huge intensification and expansion of agriculture. But how did the Must Farm villagers keep track of the seasons and manage their crops? An intriguing clue can be found in the state of Saxony-Anhalt, central Germany, in the modern city of Halle. There in the State Museum is an object so extraordinary it's recognised by UNESCO as one of the most important archaeological finds of the 20th century. It's known as the Nebra sky disk. The disk was found in 1999, and it's the earliest known depiction of the night sky. It helps us understand how Bronze Age farmers knew when the time was right to sow their crops.
This is the first picture of the real heaven we've had in the world history.
Its surface shows a cluster of stars known today as the Pleiades. It's these stars that were so important to farmers.
The picture is really simple. We had here the 7 stars of the Pleiades, and we have here the moon. And the conjunction of moon and Pleiades showed us one special time in the year, the early March.
The Pleiades are visible in the northern hemisphere throughout the winter and disappear in the spring, around the time that crops should be sown.
The special thing is not the metalworking, the special thing is the knowledge fixed into a really, really simple, convincing picture.
Now, scientific analysis has revealed that the Nebra sky disk was made from metal imported into Germany.
We analyzed the copper. The copper comes from the Alps, from the Mitterberg region near Salzburg. Then we analyzed the tin. The tin is coming definitely from Cornwall, and also the analysis of the gold shows us that it's coming from Cornwall. So there's a mixture of Germany and of England.
This exciting evidence suggests that the people of Britain and Germany were linked not only by trade, but by sophisticated technological ideas.
Modern scientific techniques like the chemical analysis of metal are proving just how dynamic and connected Europe was 3,000 years ago. The demand for metals and for luxury goods led to a system of exchange that prefigured modern international trade. And these connections would have a profound impact on the developing culture of Europe.
If water was the gateway to Europe, it seems our ancestors at Must Farm were determined to take control of it.
So they are very much stuck out here in the marshes. They're away from the dry land. They're away from their fields and their farm animals. Why have they put themselves here?
They recognised that by basically moving out onto this wet space and by sitting themselves on top of the rivers, they were able then to get themselves to the North Sea, get across to the continent, or get themselves up into Middle England and get themselves over towards the copper and tin of sort of Wales and Cornwall and things. Or even if they weren't being that mobile, the things that were passing through this landscape, just like they were passing up and down the Thames and the Trent and all the other major rivers, they were in between those movements and able to control it. It's the sense of living near the motorways, I suppose,
Yeah.
the main sort of arteries of life sort of thing, rather than plonking themselves on the margins.
The Must Farm dig is providing new answers to some of the biggest questions about Bronze Age Britain. And now, inside one of the villagers' homes, Mark has found something truly groundbreaking. Evidence of the birth of one of Britain's oldest industries, cloth making.
We're in Roundhouse 1, and in amongst all of the sort of burnt material, we're actually seeing textiles. And we're also seeing plant fibres. These lovely sort of twists or bundles of processed plant fibres in preparation for making textiles.
It just looks like a little bundle of raffia tied round.
Absolutely. And you can see so things like this made from lime bast with this little row of sort of knots going across it.
What's lime bast?
Lime bast is the fibres behind the bark of a lime tree, which you can process and really make quite fine textiles from and things. So,
I mean that there could be part of a soft flexible basket, it could be a mat, it could be a cape. It's really frustrating, but wonderful to have it.
Yes.
It is incredible that these waterlogged conditions can preserve textiles for 3 millennia.
The piece to your right there, in close-up, it's very finely woven plant textiles. I don't know, there's a magnifying glass if that helps. But
it's fabric.
It is fabric, and it's, to all intents and purposes, it looks like the stuff that my trousers are made out of. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's that sort of finely woven.
Yeah, I feel ashamed to say it, but I think I would have expected any textiles that these people had in their possession to be more like sackcloth, to be something fairly crude.
Yes.
And this is far from crude. That's absolutely beautiful. How amazing to think that that's a piece of cloth that survived for 3,000 years.
Absolutely.
Really wonderful.
Such an extensive array of delicate fabrics has never been found on a British Bronze Age settlement before. To find out just how important they are, Mark is calling in textile expert Dr. Susanna Harris.
It is important to have portable equipment. You can't always take the finds to your laboratory, so you want to have equipment that you can move around.
The microscope reveals the sophisticated techniques used to produce these ancient textiles.
What we have are these, what we call these passive elements, and the active elements. This is one of those active elements, and here you see it tucks behind this one, and it comes out again here. We can see it nicely coming out.
Susanna can see that the threads used to make these fabrics were spun out of natural plant fibres. Spinning them must have taken incredible skill.
So I've just drawn a line that's 5 millimeters long. So what I want to do is count those threads, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So over 5 millimeters, we've got 13 threads. So over a centimetre, we'd have 26 threads. And so the Must Farm textiles are really, they're up there with the other fine textiles in Europe at this time.
They are also very similar to the cloth we make and use today. Like us, the villagers wanted their clothes and their homes to look beautiful.
Just because they look black and brown now doesn't mean that was what they're like in the past, and indeed that's part of our research, is to try and understand them as they were made and in all their glorious textures and colours.
Eventually this cloth will tell us a lot more about Bronze Age lifestyles. But the question now is whether the villagers were making cloth or importing it from Europe. In the pile dwellings of Lake Constance in Germany, textiles similar to those at Must Farm have also been found. Just like at Must Farm, some of them appear to be baskets and nets, while others are much finer. If there was extensive trading between villages like these around Europe, then cloth could well have been one of the commodities that was traded. But as work progresses at Must Farm, the team discovers something never seen before in Britain, a full set of the tools needed for cloth making.
And there's this rather large object here. What's that?
Okay, so the sort of thing that looks a bit like a cricket bat is being known as a cloth beater, and the idea is that this is an object that you are hitting the flax stems with in order to turn it into plant fibres. It's actually sitting in a groove.
Yeah.
With the plant stems placed across it, and then this thing is being sort of pivoted and pounding down until you start getting the sorts of fibres that we were seeing in the bundles inside Roundhouse 1.
So you've got quite a few stages in terms of production.
As you find one element, you start to build the broader picture of its production. So textiles were perhaps the first thing we started finding, but now we've got things like the cloth beater, got things like the bobbins with the thread wound around them.
Absolutely beautiful, look at that. That's a wonderful, wonderful tiny object with, it looks like a piece of wood.
Yes.
And then the thread wound around it.
Yeah. The things like the loom weights that also turned up in Roundhouse 1. So, and like the textiles, they've also suffered from the fire event. So you can see that they've been burnt as well. They're covered in soot and things. But you can see that they're this wonderful pyramid shape.
That's just fantastic. What's it made of?
So it's just clay that's just been sort of shaped and then pierced and then crudely fired.
We knew that some cloth was made in Britain at this time, but we've never before discovered the complete technological process, all the way from harvest to manufacture to end product.
It is so rare, exceptional, to find the whole sort of range of sort of equipment in terms of their production, right from the plant stems themselves right through to garments and things. Our textile specialists are going to be in a situation where I think they're going to be overwhelmed with that detail.
Even at this early stage, the team thinks that the villagers were making cloth on a large scale. It's such an intimate glimpse into our ancestors' daily lives. You can imagine them using this technology every day in their own homes. But why were these homes, along with all those valuable tools, abandoned? The answer to that mystery could be found in the charred timbers of the roundhouses. Forensic archaeologist Dr. Carl Harrison is working to discover how the fire spread and whether it was an accident or started deliberately.
So we're getting very similar charring patterns that you might expect within a modern structure. And if that's the case, then we can make use of fire investigation techniques that we might normally associate with crime scenes, with fire scenes, to work out hopefully where it started or how it spread through the building. That might tell us more about how the building's put together in the first place.
So you're applying what you know about how a building would burn today and applying that to a structure 3,000 years ago?
Yeah, that's the idea, yeah. I'm not a fire investigator, I'm a forensic archaeologist, but the main area of interest that I have is in adapting those techniques to the archaeological record, and where we have an opportunity where the preservation is so good, it's so unusual in a British environment to actually work with timbers like this, then we can really start to use those techniques to their utmost.
After such an extensive initial examination, Carl is now focusing down on where and how the fire might have started.
I think as we investigate further and we understand how the fire developed, we'll know a little bit more then about whether what we're looking at is a fire that
ignites and begins and develops in this structure and then spreads across to the other, or whether we've got two separate fires that both start within the structures, in which case that suggests much more that there's an intentional desire to burn.
If it's an accident, we would expect it to be an accident in one place and for it to spread across the site. If it's intentional, then maybe we'll have multiple fire points.
The archaeologists also want to discover how fast the fire spread and how long the villagers had to escape. The next stage in the fire investigation is the construction of an experimental roundhouse.
The reed, the water reed, is definitely in the archaeology, and the hazel rods are as well, so you've got to concentrate so you don't fall off the roof.
Once it's complete, Carl and his team will set it alight and track the intensity and pattern of the flames. This experimental roundhouse retains the fundamental features of the must farmhouses.
All the key structural elements are here. There's a ring of supporting posts, and the principal rafters are coming down from the roof apex, and they're balancing on those principal posts. It's tied together in a circular hoop to the purlins, and these are in place to help hold the thatch up.
If the fire was deliberate, then what was the reason behind it? As the team dig deeper, they're beginning to believe that there was a darker side to life here. They're discovering that the inhabitants built a fence around their village.
There's an ash palisade running right around the edge of the settlement. These ash posts standing shoulder to shoulder with occasional oak posts. And we don't know how high they stood, but probably above head height.
Mark Knight suspects that this fence wasn't just for show.
There is something about the fact that they're in a landscape where they've detached themselves from the dry land, where they put a barricade around themselves, so there is a sense of an enclosure. It has that sense of a potential defensive nature about it.
We don't know much about how Bronze Age villages like this might have defended themselves. If the fence was needed for protection, the team would hope to find further evidence. So this find is intriguing.
Yesterday we found a bronze sword. Normally when we find bronze, it's green and crusted over, but because of the excellent preservation at the site, this is sort of like the actual bronze colour that we can see here.
The discovery is immediately exciting because it's in the Bronze Age that swords first appear. But what we don't know is whether swords were primarily prestige items commissioned by an elite to show off their wealth, or regularly used as weapons. The sheer number of swords found around Must Farm forms really important evidence, which might help the team to answer this big question.
Voila. We picked this thing up. That sharpness of the edge, I think you should feel that edge actually, because it just feels like it's just been made. It's just super sharp. So
I don't really want to run my fingers along that actually for fear of cutting them.
Yeah.
And are these actual notches from use along the sides here?
I don't know. They're really delicate, aren't they? So I don't know. I mean, they're less evident than, say, for example, what's on this blade.
Yeah.
So we've already got a break, but equally we've got these deep, deep notches, and you can see the little burrs sort of going back where something just hit it. And that might be indicative that the object itself was actually used in conflict.
So is this the evidence we're looking for, that Bronze Age swords were not just luxury goods, but needed as weapons in everyday life? And the fact that you've got swords like this here at the settlement, does that suggest that that they were fairly ubiquitous, that they're not being carried by, a small elite group of warriors, but that actually you would expect perhaps most men to be carrying a sword? People
talk about them always being disposable, but I don't know if that's quite the case, but there does seem to be a lot of these weapons in this environment.
Presumably this does speak of a certain level of violence in this society.
It's strange, isn't it? We get ourselves into sort of a twist in our interpretation as archaeologists and things. We start talking about the sort of weapons being sort of symbolic and things, and the idea that they don't represent warfare and they were there as status symbols and all those sorts of things. And we get so far down that route, the actual idea that they were ever weapons seems to have sort of disappeared, sort of thing. And yet, you felt the edge of that. You could see how they're made. They are weapons. They are there for. They're not for hunting. They are for killing.
To give us a better understanding of how our ancestors made swords, swordsmith Neil Burridge is going to try to make one using original Bronze Age technology.
This is a nervous point for me. The mould's parted at the top. That's not too bad, so I'm just going to top it up a little bit. But hopefully, very skilled. I'm probably the most experienced person in Europe at this. And I'd say I scratch a 1 on a Bronze Age scale of 10. So it is very difficult.
Just one sword takes nearly a kilo of precious bronze. Neil's experimental work shows our ancestors poured massive resources into making them, whether for prestige or for battle.
So you can see the more fragments have broken off. And you can see the sword casting. So it's not bad for a first attempt. I think the mould parted a little bit more as I expected, so it's increased the width of the sword. So it's, in Bronze Age terms, it's a bit heavy. They would have gone, nah, I don't fancy that one. It's a case of working the surface down on the blade to bring it up to something like this. So they would work on it, polishing. They use something that's locally available. The next most important stage is forging the edges down to a thin wafer. This is very skilled and it's done with anvils and hammers. When we find them in excavations, they're usually green and corroded and not very attractive, but probably in the Bronze Age, when the sword is finished, it looked like this. Beautifully polished, handle, decorated blade, and very sharp edges.
The notches on the swords found at Must Farm are being fed into an ambitious new study to analyse Bronze Age fighting techniques run by Newcastle University.
This starts far apart and immediately moves close. There's not really much in between. You're either unable to reach him or you're both literally face to face. And it's a very exciting way to fight, certainly.
Dr. Andrea Dolfini is studying hundreds of British Bronze Age weapons.
The problem I'm trying to address is we know these weapons would have been used for fighting, for combat, for raiding in the Bronze Age, but we don't know exactly how.
The weapon itself, because it's so short, effectively you're using what you could consider to be a long knife. Because of that, you have to get in so much closer, so much more personal.
The marks left on the swords as they clash help Andrea to build an accurate picture of Bronze Age battle.
We've seen very similar on the Bronze Age swords in that the dent is opened up, probably the two blades met and then swing in that direction and open the dent.
It's a very brutal, very visceral pursuit, but it requires a degree of intelligence, and so it's all about learning to read your opponent, and really, and ultimately, is to impose your will upon your opponent.
It does now appear that the must farm villagers were warriors as well as farmers. The team is unearthing lots of well-preserved spearheads.
And it's interesting that they're all occurring along the inside of the palisade. So in your mind's eye, what you start doing is you've got people stood there with their spears sort of keeping guard and things like that. So who knows? But it reminds us that this world wasn't necessarily one of just baskets and pots and roundhouses, but also was a world where that you felt that necessary to have a sword and a spear.
The evidence from Must Farm suggests that 3,000 years ago, Britain could have been a violent place. So is it likely that the fire that destroyed the village was started deliberately? Forensic archaeologist Carl Harrison has been building a picture of what happened when the village caught fire. He's now being joined by wood expert Mike Bamforth. They're going to set fire to the reconstructed roundhouse to see exactly how the flames might have behaved.
I've come with some temperature monitors and a monitor that will give us an indication of the amount of radiant heat that's going to escape from the building sideways, so that should help us understand how fire might have spread at Must Farm, perhaps.
And Mike, what are you hoping to get out of this experiment?
I think how much the house is standing at the end. Something we don't understand at Must Farm is whether the house went up in flames and then it came crashing down as part of the fire, or if it burnt and was still partially standing and then later on it's collapsed and fallen down.
Oh, it's going to be amazing.
Carl believes that the fire started inside a house, so that's what he's recreating.
The flaming energy that's going to come off this when it's lit is going to be sufficient to carry the fire up to the roof.
In discovering how fast the fire spread, Carl can also build a picture of how long the villagers had to escape.
How long do you think this fire is going to last? Is it going to go up quickly, or are we going to be here all night?
I think it will develop quite quickly. I think within 6 to 7 minutes we'll start to see some involvement in the roof space. 30 minutes and I'd expect the roof to be totally involved and then starting to collapse. There's the speed of ignition up to the roof, and you can already see the yellowing smoke that's starting to come out on this side in particular.
The fire takes hold much faster than Carl expected.
That's so quick.
Yeah, scary.
It just...
Wow.
That's a lot.
Quite warm. The heat that we can feel here is all radiant heat that's spreading laterally. So this is what's going to be striking the other buildings in our Bronze Age setting.
With houses so close together, the whole village would have gone up incredibly fast.
Well, you can see that the roundhouse shape is sort of making it cyclone. That's cold air being
I can
drawn
see
in.
embers
Yeah.
spiralling round inside it there.
You can imagine panic sweeping through the settlement, the villagers running in terror, forced to leave their precious homes behind.
Oh, it suddenly got really hot. The roof's just falling completely cold.
So that has been quick. How long, do you know what time we started the fire?
I think that can only be 10 minutes, really.
Yeah, it's
can't be
not
much
been
more
long,
than
has
that
it?
at all.
As the whole village went up, it must have been a terrifying sight.
And that wide, flat landscape with big skies, the spectacle of the pall of smoke and the flames.
Pouring off,
yeah,
a huge
absolutely.
quantity of smoke.
Be really visible in the landscape.
If this village was torched by an enemy, then it was a stark and dramatic statement of power. The weight of evidence does seem to point towards a violent attack. Most compelling is the fact that these people never returned to resettle their village or to reclaim their precious belongings.
Once the thing had burnt down, there's no real indication that they ever came back. So there is also that sort of feeling that the The force that drove them away might have been more than the fire. It might have actually been someone else who'd set that fire that didn't want these people in this landscape.
The settlement at Must Farm shows us that 3,000 years ago there were people who were living comfortably well-off lives that we can still recognise today. They were materially wealthy. They had objects which they had made themselves with great care, and they had objects which were exotic that had arrived with them through those complex Bronze Age exchange networks. But because they were settled in the landscape and because they had this material wealth, they had more to lose. So perhaps it's not surprising that during the Bronze Age we see an upsurge in violence and conflict. The excavation at Must Farm has vastly expanded our knowledge of Bronze Age Britain and taken us closer than ever before to the people who lived there. We've discovered the Must Farm villagers had the creative and practical skills to make fine textiles that rivaled anything found across Europe, using tools that are at the root of modern industry. What they couldn't make, they could acquire, because this village was connected to exchange routes that stretched across Europe and beyond. "3,000 years ago, our ancestors used technology and complex scientific ideas to transform their world. After the team finishes their work, what's left of the village will be buried once again. But this isn't the end of the Must Farm adventure.
The more intensive our excavation programme becomes, the more we're seeing. The more you dig, the more questions that come up, the more detail comes out. Every moment, another object comes up with a new story, sort of thing. So we are in the throes of completion. But in the knowledge that a lot of the materials here will go on to another stage, so they'll be under microscopes, they'll be in laboratories, they will be sliced and examined and measured, and if anything, the story that you've been given so far today will be enriched. There will be colour, there will be texture that will come out, that will transform elements of our story as well. This is the crown jewels in terms of what it will tell us about past humanities and about the way people lived in this landscape 3,000 years ago.
The story of Must Farm has only really just begun to be told, and there will be a huge amount of work left to do after the excavation has finished. It will take years of study and analysis before Must Farm reveals all of its secrets, but it's already changing our ideas about the place of Britain in Bronze Age Europe and the foundations of our modern world.